obviously we can obviously look at that, and we can, as we've done before, just jump between the two systems just to have a look at the stuff. But we're basically going to start with the toolkit. What does the toolkit give you? Well, if you've ever looked on the system, and can you see my screen clearly? That's the first thing.
Yes.
Perfect. So to check that you've got the toolkit up and running on the system, first thing you need to do, up on the top of the toolbar, is go to Tools, and then on the Tools menu you've got the Export and the Import toolkits. So we're going to start with the export. So basically what you're always going to need to do if you want to put any data or push any data into CAFM, you must generate a loading sheet. Now that loading sheet, as I say, must come from CAFM. Okay, so to do that, we'll just go to Tools and we'll go to Export Toolkit. Now on the toolkit, once you go into the system, you will see it gives you a series of objects that you can actually export or create a loading sheet for into the system so you can import. And there's everything on there from assets right the way through to purchase orders, those sorts of things. So we'll start with a basic one first of all. I'm just going to come down and I'm just going to pick up the general asset. Now, if you've ever looked at the old system, you may well remember that there used to be an asset import export option which used to sit just on here. I don't know if you guys are aware of that. That has been removed in these later versions of CAFM. So you actually need to generate your asset sheet from here. For this example, as you will see, general assets, we've got furniture assets. Now if I just move that to one side and close that down, if I just go to the asset register, again obviously your asset types are all sat here. So you can load these individually. So i.e. we're going to load a general asset type into the system. So to do that, just back to the export toolkit and down to general assets. So first of all, you select the asset. Once you've done that, click the select button. Now once you get to this stage, you now have a choice of fields that you do or don't want to import or export. So what do those fields give you? Well, each one of these fields or columns relates to something in the database for the asset. So if I just close that down one moment, go back to the asset register and retrieve. So what's it going to give you? If I look at this system here, if I click onto an asset I already have in the system, you will see all of these fields on the system. So extended details, subcomponents, so on and so forth. Every one of these fields will generate or create a column in your loading spreadsheet. So the first thing you have to ask yourself when you're importing or exporting some of this data is, are you going to fill out all of these fields? If you're not, you can then start to say to the system, well, actually, I don't need to create this on a loading sheet. So just to show you that, in its simplest of forms, if I go to Tools, again, Export Toolkit, down to General Asset and Select. So what must you have? Well, there are some key fields that you must have in the system, and the system will not let you not export or import them. If I show you, if I throw that across, you'll see there the CAFM ID column is mandatory. The unique field can go across. You don't have to have a unique ID in the system. It really doesn't matter too much whether you have it in or don't have it in. Locations, you must obviously have location or hierarchy data in the system. You must have a description, a reference and a serial number. So after that, you could say, I don't want any of these fields. And as you see, I literally just throw all of those fields into the left-hand side. So if I don't want any of those fields, or if I then say, actually, I might want that field, I can always bring it back. But you can select the fields that you want. So in this example, I'm just going to generate the simplest of asset loading sheets. Once I've selected my fields, I can select Next. You will see by default, I cannot click on CSV or XML. It will only export that document or that building sheet to Excel. Click Next again. It then asks me, where do I want to save my data? And in this case, just to make it easy, I'll put it onto my desktop. Once you've selected where you want to save it to, you have two choices. So as this says, this is an export toolkit. There are two options. You can generate a template or you can export a template. What are the differences? Well, if I export, it will include these three assets on the system. If I generate a template, it will give me a blank sheet. So what I will do is do both of them. So I'll generate the template first of all. And you'll see as it starts to build this template, it's going to bring some information out of CAFM, so it will take a little time just to generate and build these columns for you. There's nothing wrong with that, but as you see, once it's done, it's ready to go. I'm now just going to go back and I'm now going to export. So again, it's going to do exactly the same routine, but this time it's actually going to drag data out of the system for me. So if I close that down and minimize that down, we now have two spreadsheets that's created. So first of all, we'll have a look at the general assets. So this is the export of the system. If I double click into it, once it opens, as you can see, and again, I'll just bring CAFM back, and if I just minimize it down slightly, we can see in Nottingham, I have a dance floor, an LCD projector 1, LCD projector 2. If we look at here, we have the same assets. So in the same format, it has exported out of the system where the asset lives, where its description is, and where its reference is. Now, there is no right or wrong way to actually do this in the system. If I wanted to add a new asset, I can just come into this list. As you can see, these yellow fields have data in them, and this is what CAFM takes the time to build, because it actually gives you the hierarchy. So what you can do is actually come all the way across. As you can see in here, I can build the location where my asset lives, and I could say, call that boiler 1. I could give it a reference. I could give it a serial number. And again, those are the only columns that I have decided that I wanted to import or export. Once I've built those lists, and again, I can then go to a next line, copy that down and do all the work on the system. If I now import this, it will not duplicate these items, okay? The reason it will not duplicate the items, if we come to this far left, as you see, if I go as far left as I can on the spreadsheet, I've only got a column B, there's no column A, it's hidden. But if I unhide column A, you'll see there's this CAFM ID, and this is the key part. So whether you choose to use an import or an export sheet, it really doesn't matter on there. CAFM will not duplicate these three items because it will know, because it's got this CAFM ID, that those items already exist in the system. But what I can use it to do, for example here, where I've got reference and I don't have a serial number, I could put in some extra data. So basically all CAFM is going to do is update these fields without changing them. So it will update these three and it will load this final column or this final row. Once I've made all those changes, all I need to do is close the sheet down and save it. Okay, and that's the key part. You must close your sheets down before you try to load them into the system. So that sheet is now ready to be loaded back into the system. So again, in CAFM, back to Tools. This time, we're going to come down to the Import Toolkit. Okay, on the Import Toolkit, slightly different. Again, make sure you are on the Object Importer. Again, it will default to Excel. You can then click Next. It then says, where do you want me to find the folder, or the folder that the import sheet is in? So again, just navigate to it. We know obviously ours is on the desktop. So if I go to my general asset Okay, you've got a little magnifying glass there, so if you've got a few of those folders, you can just open them up again just to check, make sure you've got the right sheet, which we have. Close it down, and then you say next. The first thing, you'll then get the system will pause, as you can see there. Now what it's going to do is rematch the columns on the system. So it knows if we wanted to import all of the general assets, it would want all of these columns, but it's just checked on the spreadsheet to say, right, I know I need to import these columns. That's fine. You can then click next. The key part, you then come to this section. So it says ready to import. When you're ready to begin the operation, press the import button. Alternatively, perform a validate step to ensure the data is valid before actually modifying any data. So what that will do, or what that means it will do, the system will validate the information before it tries to load it. So if you have any errors, it will tell you what those errors are before it even does anything. So if we click on the validate button, you'll see we know we had 4 objects. So there were the 3 objects that already existed plus the new object. So it's processing those, it's reading the data, and it's going to come back and say, are there any errors? And again, you might get this option pop up. It sometimes says not responding. Once it's done, it says validation of 4 asset records or records completed, ready to go. And this is the key part. Once you've clicked OK, you get to see this, and it says import report, no errors. So as soon as you get no errors, you know that you can actually go on and actually push that data into the system. Now, I'm just going to take a step back, and I'm going to show you some of the things that could cause an error on the system. So I know for a fact that if I put a very long column reference in there, okay, oh, my mouse is just playing up, save it, save that, again, just going to say next, next, and I'm just going to validate that same sheet. As you can see, you can validate the same sheet as often as you want, and this is what I've done it for. So it's now telling me I have 1 row with 1 error, no rows with warnings, so a total of 1 errors. The error details have been written to the data source, and this is the key part for you guys. Click OK. From within this screen, go back again, and reopen the spreadsheet. Now when you reopen the spreadsheet, that's where this column comes in, the exceptions column, and it will actually tell you the exact fault that you have on the system. You can either click on it and then just literally widen the screen down. So in this case, the object has broken rules, problems with associated items, general asset boiler 1, so we know it's this row, on the space boiler room, the maximum length of the reference field cannot be more than 30 characters. So what's that telling us? Well, we know full well that in here we put more than 30 characters in, so that's the sort of error it's going to show you. If there's duplicates, it will show you. So if you've called 2 assets that's exactly the same identical thing, you've given them the same reference, the same serial number, it will come up, it will tell you these errors. The key part is you can keep validating information as many times as you need to, and once I've done this one, so in this example, I know I've fixed that error. So I can actually just remove that, close it down, save it, go next, and then revalidate. So you know, you may need to revalidate 3 or 4 times before you clear all those errors, but there is nothing stopping you getting to this point. Once you get to this point, you can say, great, no problem at all, I am ready to import. When you're ready to import, it will pop up and tell you, give you this little warning message. Okay, so again, as it says on there, unless it's an empty database, it's strongly advised that you take a backup before proceeding. So again, if you've got a large data load to do, it is always ideal just to get your IT to back up the database should anything majorly go wrong. But we validated it, so we know we're not going to get any errors. Do you wish to continue? Yes, I do. Again, gone through, general asset, it's added it in. Again, click OK, telling me there's no errors. Click OK from there and close the screen down. So I'm still showing my 3 assets that I had. If I now click retrieve, I now have my new asset in the system. Okay, go into it, all of the reference, all of the data that we put into the system. So again, the principle here is how much data do you want to put into the system to generate it, and what information are you going to use? If I just close this down, and if I go back to my tools and go to my export toolkit again, I'm just going to go down to general asset. This time I'm going to leave all of these fields in the system and export them out, because I just want to show you how much data potentially you can have. Okay, so if I click generate template again, this is going to take a little longer because there's a lot more data to come out of the system. So we'll just wait for that to finish, and then I will show you. Okay, so that's generated. If I close that down and just minimize down, I've got my, this is the new sheet that I've created, General Asset 1. If I click on it, again, we're always going to have the location descriptions as we had before. We've got the descriptions, we've got serial number, but can you now start to see, if I just scroll right, can you see how much data is on the system? So the key part is, do you actually need all of this information before you start to build it? So as you can see there, we go all the way to BX. So that's a hell of a lot of columns on the system to actually use. So it's always worthwhile looking at it and saying, right, what data do I need to drag into the system? So that's the first part. Any questions around the general setup or process for creating a spreadsheet from you guys?
Yeah, we have one question.
The fields you choose before generating the template, can we edit them or add something to them?
Okay, so in terms of can you add in stuff here? No, you cannot. It has to be, because these fields come out of the system. Let me just go on to here. So these fields here, or are you talking about, say, for example, the reference data? So yes, the information. Okay, so this is the key part to it. You cannot add, amend anything into these columns because these are your location descriptions. So for example, if I show you on the system, if I go back to CAFM, at the moment in CAFM I have 2 locations in the system. Okay, if I go into here and I create a new location, and we'll just call it new, keep it nice and simple. Okay, I've added a new location. I don't have a building or anything below there on there, but if I now go back to this spreadsheet, you can see I still only have 2 locations. So if you are adding new location or new hierarchy information, you must generate a new spreadsheet. You cannot push the extra, you cannot push new information into the system. And exactly the same happens. I'm just going to, oh, I won't close that down, just to show you on here. So we won't use catalog description, but we will use asset group description. And again, you'll start to see the difference between the color coding on these columns. Anything that is yellow is a drop down field, so it exists in the system. So can you see here, I've created 5 asset groups, one called AV, one called boilers, one called fire, one called hire equipment, one called lighting. If I go back to CAFM, go back to my reference data, and in reference data go to asset group and click retrieve, can you see I've got my 5 codes there? So you need to make sure that if you're exporting this information, that the reference data exists in the system behind it. Why is that the case? Well, the way that the spreadsheets work is fairly complicated. So information is linked. So do you remember when you're building reference data, you always have to say in the reference data that does the reference data belong, and just to go through it, does the reference data, when I create new, does it belong to the company or is it specific to a location? So it's all tied to that information. So the background information needs to be in place before you export the data. Now, that's not to say you could go to tools and we could go to our export toolkit, and as you can see here, asset group. If I click select, so I'm going to now import a load of asset groups. Okay, so I say next, next. Again, I'll just put it's on the desktop, so I will export the data I've got in the system. Okay, close that down, close that down for now. Asset group codes. So if I go into here, again, it's exported out the information I have already, but I could now put in there, I don't know, so I've just added a couple more options into the system. If I close that down, save it, back to CAFM, again, I can import that in. Again, I'm just going to validate it. I know there's no errors on the system. Run the import. Say yes, that will build that straight into the system. Click OK, OK, close it down, click retrieve. My codes are there. At this stage, if I was then doing my assets, I would then need to go back to tools, back to export, and build a new import sheet. You cannot, so like I'm saying with that, as I go back to any of these options on here, where I've just picked the wrong one. Let me just come back and close that out. So on this one here, just to go in and show you, on my asset groups, my new codes do not exist. So you need to make sure that your reference data that you're going to be using when you build, say for example, your assets, already exists in the system. The same process as your hierarchy. So you need to build your hierarchy into the system before you start to run or use these sheets. The reason it does that, and this is where we get a little bit technical, if I select this option, you can see here, we've just selected it and it says Thiel, but if you look in the actual taskbar at the top, there's this extra code that sits on the system, and that's the key part. CAFM will start to load that information behind the scenes. So it knows that if I go to Thiel, I can then select a building, I can then select a floor, I can then select a core, a zone, so on and so forth. That's the reason it has to be in there, and that's exactly the same as your reference data. So if we'd created a bit of reference data that only attaches to Thiel, then that's the reason why it will work. So you have to build all that reference data first, but you can do it a lot quicker and you can do a lot more of it in an easier go. Now, for example, in your general assets, if you have a list or you have an Excel spreadsheet of assets that you have in the system, there is nothing stopping you copying the column for the description, copying the reference. What you cannot copy in is obviously the location, because this is very specific to CAFM itself. So you would have to build this information. Okay, but having said that, let's go to core 1. Having said that, if you have several assets at this level, there is nothing stopping you, once you've built this once, highlighting it, right click, copy, you could then come down several columns, right click again. Now this is the key part. You need to go to the paste special and you only want to paste the values. You do not want to do a Control C, Control V. You need to only paste the values in and that will build it. So from there you could then start to have in there, for example, your assets. I could do that. So again, on the system, I could even have it in this sense that I could set up a string of assets. So these assets here, okay, and I'm just going to load those straight in to the system just to show you. Tools, import, next. Again, pick the asset list, click next. Now in this case, I'm just going to jump across and go straight to import. Again, it's showing me how many columns or rows it's bringing in. Click OK, no errors, retrieve. Okay. On here, in the locations, etc., etc., I can pick through the information. Let's go to my asset register. It might show them to me then. And there we go. So there's my assets, 1 to 18 in the system. No problem at all. That is fine. You could load your assets like that. So you could just bulk load an amount of assets. What you can also do, once you've done that, if I go into this here, and I'm just going to filter it with a description of asset. So using that, again, it now just shows me the 18 assets I have imported into the system. There's nothing then stopping you. Right click, export that list using the toolkit. Again, you get to choose the fields you want to bring out. Click next, click next. Let's just write it back over the same one. Say yes, we've exported that. Let it build the information. Close that down and let's open that up. The only difference we have between these two assets now is that these are in the system. As you can see, it reorders them in an alphabetical format, but the difference being they now have a CAFM ID. So there is nothing stopping me, once I've got them in the system, of renaming them, pushing them in back into the system. If I save that now, save that, close that down, go to Tools, go to Import, next, next. Again, I can validate, or I can just run the straight import straight into the system. I'm just going to run it as a straight import in there because I know there are no errors against it. That's done. Click retrieve. You'll see it's searching for asset. If I change that to change now, and there's my original assets. I haven't changed the integrity of the system. All I'm doing is manipulating what the name is called. Again, with that, if I come into here, you'll see if I go to extended details on the asset group, I can pick any of the asset groups that I've got on the system, just the same as if I go to the spreadsheet, open it up, and again go across to the asset group here. I can see all of those new asset groups in the system. So that's the key bit. If you're going to add reference data in, then you must have that reference data in place before you use it. Sorry, you were saying?
Internet is slow, or there's something wrong with the connection. There's a delay, like we hear you late, or it's disconnecting, and
Okay, do you want to try and disconnect and come back in?
this may help.
It may do. Unfortunately, it's not, because I'm using third-party software. I can't change any settings at this end to actually sort of change any settings to make sure that it goes faster. So we can try and you can try and disconnect and reconnect if you want.
Okay, let me disconnect.
Okay.
Yeah, just give me a minute.
No problem.
I'll connect you again. Hello? Hello? Andrew?
Can you hear me any better? Better connection at all?
Yeah, now I'm okay. Now I can hear you.
Perfect. Okay, so have you got...
Yeah.
Do you guys get the idea of how it works?
Yeah, and we understand this part.
Okay.
Lean is having additional question. Is like, for example, she's having the person's file. She's having additional fields which does not exist in the system. Example, religion. She
Okay.
knows to log that for some business reasons.
Okay.
And how you advise us to do this on the screen and on the upload?
Okay, so how do you do that? So let me just close this down. Let's go to CAFM. So let's go into people. And again, we'll just click retrieve. So I don't have a massive people record field. So I'm just going to go in and edit mine. And I'll just make it a little bit bigger so we can see it all. So you have some options on here as to what you can do. You could look at employee details. Okay, we've got an option here called personnel grade. Now you may not be using that personnel grade. Okay, so what you can do, bear in mind that says personnel grade. Let's close it down. We go tools, options. We'll go to label overrides, and then you'll see it says on here type. So on the type, we'll come down and we will select the person category. Okay, in the person category, we are now looking for personnel grade. If I come across here, can you see on the screen there's this label that says the original label, which is half the screen, and then it's the new label. You must click in to the field on the right hand side. On there, we'll put in religion. Save and close. Okay, that's going to load into the sheets. If I now go back to my person record and go to employee details, can you see it's changed the field name to religion? Okay, that's one stage. If I come out of there, if I go to my reference data, if I go to my code type, because again it's reference data, it will not be stored under person code. It's now created its own box called religion. Click retrieve. In here I could then say build that list. So on and so on and so on. Build those lists in, go back to my people records, go into here, go to my employee details, go to religion, and they're there ready to go, ready to use. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's easy.
So the key part is with this, if you have some extra fields or some extra data you need to use, you need to look through some of these fields. Now there's nothing on this front page potentially that you could use other than these user codes. The only issue with using user codes, as you can see, they are not reference data fields. They are purely free type fields. Okay, so they're not reportable. If you want to be able to report or group people, for example, i.e. like religion, you could use one of these fields on the system. Okay, there's some extra options on here, but have a look at the different fields. Department, religion, you could rename those fields if you need to. Okay, again, you could rename some of these fields at the top on there. But also that then, if you wanted to use this to actually import the information, if I go to tools and export toolkit, and we'll go down to person. Okay, click select. On here, you'll see it still comes up with personal grade code description. That is purely on the export sheet. If I just click next and next, and I will export the information. Again, wait for it to build. Okay, and then have a look at it. Okay, come across, department description we have in there. Personnel grade, so you'll see it will still hold the same reference on there, but if I drop that down, we can see we've got the information through the system. So that's how you can change it, and it will only affect that one field that you're on in the system. Okay? Any more questions?
We're fine. I think it's easy for us. But anything else we need?
That is really the key part. So it's just building that information, okay, and making sure that you have the information. Now, I don't know whether you want to resend the information to me that you've got, and I can, so obviously have a go at building your sheets, okay. If you want to, you can send that information to me. I can check it over and give you some advice as well, if you need to.
That would be great. That would be great. Because I think it's almost ready, but we need to reformat it as per the
Okay, well, what we can do, I mean, we've obviously got some time from today's session, so what maybe we can do, if you guys go away, reformat your sheets, get them into the CAFM sheets, then we can get a dial in the first time you run one of those trial imports, and we can then start to look at it from there. And then obviously if we've got errors, we can then go through the advice of this needs to change, this needs to change, you need to have this information, so on and so forth. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sounds good. Great.
Perfect.
That would be
excellent.
Sure. Okay, then if there is nothing left at your side, we're fine with this.
No problem at all. I will send you a copy of the recording. I will also send you some, obviously the usual sort of info sheets, those sorts of things, and then give me a shout in a a week, couple of days, week, whatever, whenever it is, and we'll arrange a time just to dial back in and have a look and just watch and maintain the loading routine and go from there.
Thank you, Andrew. Just can we have additional one question?
Yes, of course you can. Yeah.
Listen, question is not related to this. The tree display on the system on the left side.
Yes, the hierarchy.
Yeah. Can we resort this one based on something other than hierarchy? Like, it's sorting now based on alphabetic.
You can. So you've got, obviously on here, if I just drag this open, you've got this option here. So it's always going to sort it, in this case, by physical location. So that is, in this case, geographic locations. If you click this drop down, you can sort it by any of these methods. Okay. The key part to it, if you're going to sort it with these, so as you can see here, this will sort it by, for example, if I select it as category, then it sorts it into the category format. But the key part for that to work, if I open up one of these locations, is that I must have, and it's actually on buildings, the categories, I must have a category in this. So let me just come back one more and just go into, not there. Let me go to Thiel. Let me go and just resort that back to physical location for the moment. Open that up, edit the building. On the building, we have category codes here. So as you can see, category. So I don't know, let me just put one in. Again, I'll put it at company and I'll call it accommodation. Okay. So I'm going to select that code into here for accommodation, save and close. So at this moment in time, as the physical layout, it doesn't affect it. But if I now say, right, sort it by category, I can say, right, all of my buildings that are accommodation, all of my buildings that are industrial, all of those sorts of buildings. So you can sort it, but it does rely on having that reference data behind the scenes. So before you start to use it, otherwise, as you can see here, it basically just spits the data out at the bottom here with no extra information. So as you can see on there, literally, I need to go through and make sure all of that information is ordered. If it will order it in physical location alphabetically, but again, you know, what are you wanting to maybe display it as?
I think this is okay now.
Okay, okay, cracking.
Okay, just that idea. Anything else? Okay, then we'll just work in our sheets. We'll get back to you once we have something ready, at least to invite us for the first time.
Perfect, fantastic. I look forward to it.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Take care, guys. Yeah. Bye-bye.